Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel. I'll be joined with Rabbi David Aaron after the break. So many of us are stumbling through life because we're just being weighed down. Weighed down not by physical weight, although that may also be a challenge we're facing, but specifically I think even more challenging is emotional weight. Emotional baggage that we carry with us oftentimes through so much of our lives, and the extent that we're carrying so much of it, we're so used to carrying it, that as much as it's weighing us down, we don't know how life could be better without it. We could be much lighter and being able to move a lot faster and quicker and with much better more ease if we only could let it go, put it down, just put it down. And yet I think because we're just sometimes so used to carrying this with us that we don't know how life could be without it. We're so used to symptoms of in relationships, in different life circumstances and situations that may be not ideal, may not be pleasant, and could be so different, but we're just used to this is how it is that we don't even recognize that if I could understand what the cause of all of this is, and I could effectively deal with it, then I could put down these heavy emotional suitcases, be so much lighter, so much freer, and so much happier in my life. So the question is, how can we identify emotional baggage that we are carrying that's holding us back? And then there may be some of us who say, oh, I can recognize that emotional baggage. I like that term. In fact, I know what I'm carrying, but I just can't figure out how to put it down. Why, even if I can identify what it is that I'm carrying, what's holding me back? And again, this affects relationships, it affects work, it affects our sense of self, how much do we enjoy being with our own selves? Well, if I have a lot of emotional baggage and negativity, if I'm really harsh on myself, I don't have the best sense of self-worth, I may not even enjoy spending as much time with myself as I could if I could let all that go. And instead of carrying this heavy emotional baggage that I don't want to be taking with me, how can I choose something else instead that would make me feel better about what I'm carrying, what is inside of me, what is with me? And so even if I can identify, oh, I know what it is, but I just don't know how to let go. I don't know why this seems to be stuck on me. I would like to let it go. I'd like to replace it with something better. I just need to know how. So this is the topic that I want to address with the rabbi after the break is how can we identify, recognize, and learn how to let go of any kind of emotional baggage that is really keeping us back, weighing us down, slowing us down, and preventing us from really being who we want to be, who we can be, the better version of ourselves that is just awaiting to be released. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron. Rabbi Aaron, so many in life are being weighed down from moving forward, from getting to where we really want to go because we're carrying so much what I'd call emotional baggage. And it is so heavy. It weighs us down. And I think so much of this happens from maybe early experiences we've had in life. And we just carry this stuff. And it really affects like for example, feelings of self-worth. If I don't think I'm capable, I don't have a good sense of self, of my own worth, my abilities, it can affect the way I choose relationships. It can affect the kinds of skills I feel like I can develop in myself. It affects the whole attitude I go forward with in life, just as one example of this kind of emotional baggage that we just carry with us, and it's weighing us down. And the question is, how can we, so to speak, relieve ourselves of some of these emotional baggage burdens that we keep bringing with us forward when it's so unnecessary? And if only we'd know how to let it go, we'd be able to make so much more progress in so many important areas of our life.
Yeah, wow. That's a big one. And the first step to unloading the baggage is to first recognize that I have the baggage. If I don't know that I have the baggage, I really can't let go of it. I went shopping to the market Machane Yehuda, and I had like 3 kilos. I know that I bought 3 kilos of I don't know what, 2 kilos of oranges and 1 kilo of peaches, whatever, and it was heavy. And then the next day, I got on the scale because I wanted to lose some weight, and I suddenly realized what 3 kilo is, and that I am I feel like I have this 3 kilo that I've been carrying in my body that I'm not even aware of, and so how do you first identify that you are carrying baggage, and then to identify what is the baggage, and then to identify and how do I drop it? Those are the three things. I think a lot of people, like in my case, I didn't realize how much baggage or weight I was carrying unnecessarily until I said, wow, 3 kilo is actually a lot. It's not a small amount. And then identify, well, where is it? What is it? And how do you get rid of it? I know for myself, one of the baggages that I carried for quite some time, and it was hard for me to recognize it, was my mother's sadness, because my mother is a survivor of the Holocaust, and I had always had this deep feeling that she's sad. Not that she was depressed, because she was a very active woman, but I felt that she was sad. And I realized only much later in my life that what made it hard for me to be happy was that I felt I would be abandoning my mother's sadness, that I felt guilty being happy when so many people, not only my mother, but so many other people are sad. And I found myself, I realized that when I am happy, I start thinking about all the people I know that are sad, and then I start feeling guilty that I'm happy. Well, first of all, I didn't know I had that issue with happiness and sadness until later on, where I finally identified that what's holding me back is this feeling of feeling uncomfortable to be happy, and feeling maybe even sometimes guilty to be happy. And part of that was interesting, because the other day my wife and I were looking at pictures of the family, and I saw a picture of my mother at one of our family events, and she was beaming with joy. And I suddenly was shocked, because if I were to close my eyes and imagine my mother, who is no longer in this world, then I would see sadness in her eyes. And suddenly I saw in this picture happiness, and I realized, you've been carrying a picture which isn't the only picture of your mother. And what, so we have to identify what is the baggage, and how is it weighing us down? Why do we have to let go of it? And then how do we let go of it? And a big part of how to let go of it is to start talking another narrative in our lives, to tell ourselves another story. I've quoted this before, but it's to me really a mantra, which is, I heard a philosopher once say, we'd be better off listening more to ourselves, talking to ourselves more than listening to ourselves. Because on automatic, there's these negative voices that go off, and interpretations that are very spontaneous and not necessarily responsible. And we have to kind of grab the mic and decide what we're going to say to ourselves. And if what we're saying to ourselves is disempowering or depressing, or, then we have to stop talking that way to ourselves. And so really, so much of our life is the narration that we're giving it, and what we're saying in our heads.
Rabbi, I so appreciate how clear you're making this, and it almost seems so simple. Recognize I'm carrying this, identify it, what is it, and and then obviously maybe you think the complex part is, how do I drop it? But to some degree, even though it would seem so simple to say just identify it, what your point is that it really isn't always so simple, because of the fact that when we're so used to feeling a certain way for so long, as you're saying, you can be carrying something for so long, it can be hard to even identify what it is, because we're just used to always feeling this way, just from the time we were younger, let's say. And it's almost like to be able to really recognize that this isn't what's normal. Normal is what's normal for me. Sometimes I've you hear sometimes from people. I was just reading actually a story of someone who was talking about how in her family there wasn't very much emotional communication. It was very technical communication, and that's just how she grew up. So she thought that was just normal. And it wasn't until she was much older and started spending time in other people's houses, like she would never even think to tell her mother that something was bothering her because everything was just shushed up. There wasn't discussion if someone wasn't feeling well. There were a lot of secrets. You know, one of the parents had to have a surgery. The kids were never told. They just all of a sudden weren't home for a few days, and it was just normal to her. And it took her going out of what was normal for her to see there could be something else, and starting to look back and realize, wait, maybe this isn't so normal. So I think sometimes when we're carrying something for so long, we don't even recognize how we could feel better. We may even have certain symptoms, but we may not realize where the actual cause is. And that first step is so essential in really then having hope to make those changes.
Yeah, well, my guess is that a lot of this is childhood wounds. And I think if a person were to sit and think about, what were some of the painful moments in their childhood, it's probably where this is coming from. Most of the cases that I think most of it is coming from childhood wounds, whether, how I was treated in school or how I was treated by my siblings or my family or whatever. But what is it that what is painful in my background? Because somehow I've been trying to deal with it, and very often not in a healthy way. So there's, so I think if we could just find out, kind of just think about where are the wounds, and then I can begin to see how to heal those wounds. But that's, I think, courageous, because a lot of us just don't want to remember. And, and maybe it's good that we don't remember, but it might be holding us back because deep inside we actually do remember, and we're just in constant repression of it. So and again, I don't know if a person should just do this on their own. I think probably they should be in the company of someone that they know they can trust and that they love and is capable to be able to share honestly where they're hurting, what is inside me, where does it hurt? Physically, if someone asks me, like right now I have a cut on my finger, it's not hard for me to say, well, my finger hurts. Well, so the question is, where inside myself is there still a hurt? And what have I been doing to deal with it? And it could be what I've been doing is spending a lot of time not dealing with it.
Mm. This is so often, I think, a journey that many would enter therapy in order to work on. But as you're pointing out, there's also ways to work this through with someone just who you trust and can have more of an objective understanding. You can share with them, but they can have hear you out from a more objective perspective. But it brings to mind what I'm talking about, that sometimes people carry the emotional baggage for so long they don't even realize they're carrying it until certain symptoms start cropping up. It even just brings to mind a scenario that unfortunately I've seen too many times, where you might have someone who's been in a few really problematic relationships, and after a few times you wonder, why do I keep, let's say if it's a woman, why do I keep picking these men that are just not healthy people, and you start looking at yourself. And this is not necessarily the reason, but sometimes what might come out is I tend to get myself worth from needing to fix other people, help other people. If it's the man, the knight in shining armor, or if it's the woman, I just feel that self-worth when I can try to help someone else who's in distress. And so therefore I'm attracted to people who are in distress, and then in the end I can't fix them. And then it can be a journey that takes so many challenges and making decisions that end up negatively affecting me in my life, in order to be able to look back and then say, the root of my decisions here in relationships which haven't been healthy for me is I need to start working on realizing I don't need to be fixing everybody else in order to feel good about myself. How can I feel good about myself without needing to have other people that need fixing to be in my life? But this journey, again, sometimes we're carrying this stuff for so long with making so many mistakes along the way, and I think what we're talking about here is identifying it. The earlier we can identify it, the less pain we have to go through by continuing to carrying this with us.
Yeah, well, I wonder sometimes that people are drawn to people who have their problem. And since they, in some unconscious way, they want to fix their problem, which they're not consciously aware of, but they're drawn to people that have some remnant or some something that reminds them of their own problem, and they have this desire to fix that person when really what they need to be doing is trying to fix themselves.
Which is, I think, when we're talking about identifying where the bag that I'm even carrying this baggage is when I'm feeling that something, what you're sharing here is actually a very helpful point, is that if I keep noticing certain problems I'm trying to help other people on, sometimes turning it back and saying, wait, where is this within me, can help me actually work on relieving some of this baggage I'm carrying in myself so much sooner. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Soul Talk. Leora Mandel talking with Rabbi David Aaron about how to let go of emotional baggage that is weighing us down. We are carrying this throughout the journey of our life, and it would be so much easier if we can just let go of some of the things that are really holding us back. And what we spoke about in the first segment is really understanding that so much of this has come from earlier times in our life, which means we've been carrying this for a long time, and the importance of being able to and how to identify that we are carrying this burden. Rabbi, right before the break, you mentioned that so often we are sometimes we're attracted to other people who may have some of our own challenges, and we see it in them, and we're trying to help them through it. And it is interesting that it's sometimes, again, it's so much easier to look outside ourselves, and it's so hard to look within. And such an important step of identification, and even how to go about then dropping it, is to really have that look within, to have a better understanding of myself, so that I can then make the changes that I need to make.
Yeah, so what came to my mind right now is, imagine a person was born destined to be a refrigerator repairman. Now, he doesn't know this about himself, but he finds himself very intrigued with refrigerators and very drawn to broken ones. And he has to awaken to the fact that the reason why I'm drawn to broken refrigerators is because my destiny is to fix broken refrigerators. And I think the same thing is the problems that we're drawn to and that we think about a lot, very possibly is exactly the sign of that's what we've come to help fix. Now, it's very hard to fix ourselves. Just like a brain surgeon cannot, he might be the world's best brain surgeon, but he cannot do surgery on himself. But a big part of it, and, I just did this in Tehillim, is probably one of the hardest things for people is to get help. This whole self-help movement is so interesting. I don't know how many people can actually help themselves. It might be actually a mistake to even think I can help myself. The Talmud says that a prisoner can't get himself out of jail. So imagine a guy keeps buying books on how to get out of jail. But no, you can't get yourself out of jail. Somebody else has the key. And you have the key to somebody else. And so it could be that self-help is really is really confusing people and actually feeding exactly their problem is you have to get help. And stop being self-reliant, but humbly look for someone that you can get help from.
It's interesting because in any situation, what we really want, where we can be most effective, is focusing on what can I change and understanding and having clarity what can I change. Because I think so much frustration in life comes when we try to put efforts and energy into trying to change parts of situations or other people that we really have no effect on, instead of putting the energy on what we can change. And in this process too, identifying that we need help, that we're having certain symptoms that are probably coming from a cause that maybe we can't identify on our own, but that if we could understand it better and then know know how to work through it, we would be so much lighter and freer to live a more joyous life. That is where I can put my energy into making a change. But then to actually change it myself is very important, as you're bringing out, that so often we don't have the objectivity to ourselves to be able to pull ourselves out of ourselves. That analogy of bringing ourselves out of the prison is, but you have to recognize, but I do want to relieve myself from the prison that I am in right now.
Right. Well, basically what's happening is I'm trying to apply the problematic way I think, which created my problems, to solve my problems. And so I have a problematic way of thinking, and that's why I have these problems. And I'm using that same problematic thinking to solve the problems, which is, in fact, the source of the problems. I need somebody else that thinks differently and be able to listen to them and get outside of my pattern of thinking. And so, that's why it's so important that a person has a mentor that they can turn to, a friend. But a true friend is somebody that you know can help you advance and want to help you advance. I recently was speaking to a friend who had gone to many therapists who have not helped them. And I, in just a couple of hours, really was able to get a breakthrough. And he said, I don't understand. I've gone to so many therapists, and you're not a therapist, and they couldn't help me in such a short amount of time. You helped me. And I thought about that, and I really don't think it's because I'm brilliant. I think it's because I care. He went to therapists, and this is their job. I'm not saying that a therapist can't help you, but you definitely want to be in the presence of a therapist that this is not a job. They really genuinely care. And already feeling that I'm in the presence of somebody that genuinely cares is already healing. Because really, so many people's baggage is linked into a deep feeling that I am unwanted, I am uncared for, and nobody really acknowledges that I even exist. And had I disappeared, no one would notice. In so many ways, there are a lot of people that are suffering that. And so you really want to look to somebody that cares or find a truly caring therapist.
That is so important, because I think so much we were saying we're looking for other people that have problems we're trying to fix. There's also a reflection. If someone is caring as they're listening to me, then that care comes back, it reflects back to me, and then I may be able to even see the problems that I'm sharing in a very different light. It is interesting, too, because oftentimes, as you talk about, again, I personally think that there are effective therapists who can be helpful, and there's plenty who aren't, but they can also be very effective to talk to a wise, caring, loving person. But what's interesting so often, and I think we've all had this experience, there's so many times where we have some problem that's just circling in our head, and it's going in circles, and we go through circular thinking. So as you're saying, we keep using the same problematic thinking to try to solve our problems. We feel like we're not going anywhere. And then you have a friend that really cares. I think that element is so important, as you're sharing, that you talk it out with. And it's not even that they necessarily give you advice, but all of a sudden, as you're talking to that other person, instead of all this being inside of you, it's coming out of you, and you can almost hear yourself in a way you hadn't heard yourself before. And again, I think the fact that you're sharing with someone who cares probably is so helpful in getting this clarity. And all of a sudden, some new way of thinking that gives you a new idea that you hadn't thought about, a new angle, a new understanding. It's like you can almost answer some of your own problems, and you thank the person so much. Wow, you helped me. And they'll say, I've had this. I think many can relate to this. Well, I just really was listening to you. I don't know. You really found the solution yourself. And somehow when we were in our own heads, we couldn't come up with the solution because we just kept going in circles. And just talking it out sometimes is helpful in getting that little extra objectivity we need to ourselves to hear ourselves differently.
Well, that's because I think we're not the same person by ourselves as we are with certain other people. Because I don't think the self is so set in stone. I think we are all emerging out of relationship. And so if I have carbon and monoxide, and carbon, goes and gets some therapy from monoxide, it's not going to work because it turns into carbon monoxide. And so there's really chemistry there, that there are certain people, when I'm in their presence, I become very positive. But there are other people, when I'm in their presence, the kind of spiritual chemistry happening here is not positive. And that's because we are transformed by our relationships. And that is huge, that people don't understand how they are so defined by the kind of relationships and who they're in relationship with. And I recently had this conversation with someone, and I said, one of the most important decisions in your life is going to be, who are your friends? Because, my son, when he was a little boy, he brought this friend over, and the friend was the sweetest little kid in the world. And yet when they got together, they were terrible. And so I realized that he's a good kid, but he's a bad friend, because the two of them do not have a chemistry that brings out the best in any one of them. And so there really is something to be said, that people are kind of fixated on, this is who I am, but this is who I am in this environment. This is who I am in these kind of relationships. And I could transform myself if I could find healthier relationships and place myself in a better environment.
And it goes back to that first step of identifying, recognizing, wait a minute, in this relationship, there's certain parts of me that come out that aren't the parts of me that make me feel healthy, make me feel good, make me feel like I'm my better self. And as long as we can identify that, that's the first step towards, instead of continuing in those relationships that are in those situations that are weighing us down, is saying, I also have free will to leave this relationship, leave this situation if it's not bringing out a better part of me. But again, identifying it, and especially the earlier we identify that we're carrying something, in a sense, the easier it is. I think, how often do we have a situation where at first you realize something's heavy, and then at a certain point you almost go numb to it, right? You sort of get, even if it's an unpleasant situation to some degree, you can almost stop sensing that this is what's going on because you just get used to it. So I think the point you're making of recognizing that when we can identify something as early as we can, the better off we are too.
Right. There's a Hasidic saying that says, if I am me because you are you, and you are you because I am me, then I am not me and you are not you. Now, very often people read that in a kind of a negative way, like, don't be you because I am me. You got to be yourself, and I got to be myself, and you need to find self-definition independently. But I think the Hasidic statement is actually saying something else. I think it's saying something very positive. It's saying, if I am I because you are you, and that's a fact, and you are you because I am I, and that's a fact, then I am not I and you are not you, but there's just a we. And if I think that there's a self-contained, self-defined, independent I, that's a lie. There is no such I. We are merging out of the kind of relationships that we're in. And therefore, there was a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers, and maybe we'll talk about that after the break.
It is a very important point, though, as Rabbi, you're pointing out, is especially when we talk about identifying, one way to help us identify, are we carrying more baggage than we want, is to look at the kinds of relationships that we are in, because of the fact that oftentimes, as you're explaining, that is a sign to us, the kinds of relationships we're in, if they're healthy, if they're good, if they're elevating, is a sign that I am not carrying heavy things that are holding me back. And if I'm not in the relationships I'd like to be in, then that is maybe one of the first places to identify that I'm carrying more than I'd like. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Soul Talk. Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron, talking about how to let go of emotional baggage. And one of the big points before the break you were talking about is that we emerge out of relationship, and the importance of recognizing that the relationships we choose to enter are so much of a reflection of where we are. They help bring out different parts of us. Hopefully, if we are in healthy relationships, we are feeling elevated and good and light and moving forward. And they can also be a symptom of recognizing that I have so much baggage I'm carrying. I'm choosing relationships that are continuing to hold me down. You also mentioned you were going to share with us about the psychologist Carl Rogers and getting more insight into what how important relationships are and our connections.
Right. So I begun with understanding that we are not self-defined. Nobody is self-defined. We are defined by the relationships. And if we want to change the definition, then perhaps the place we should be looking towards is the relationships that we're in. So Carl Rogers, a psychologist, he made a point that very often the attitude in therapy was you have to keep a professional distance from your patient. And he said, no, the reason why my patient is not well is because he doesn't have healthy relationships. So whereby there were those that were saying, a therapist isn't supposed to be their client's friend. They should be their therapist. He actually took a completely different approach. He says, no, it's not that way. Rather, the way to go is to be their friend and to genuinely show them care. And that the health that will emerge out of their therapy with you will be by virtue of just feeling that they are in the presence of somebody that is a true friend, and that relationship will bring health to them. And I think that's very true. And they do say that about Aaron the Cohen, Aaron the priest, Moses' brother, that the way he would transform people is he would befriend them. He would see somebody who was a bad person, and he would befriend that person. And people would say, how is it possible that Aaron, this holy man, is friendly with this bad person? But what would happen is this bad person is about to do something bad, and then he sees Aaron walking down the street and says, oh my gosh, how can I face Aaron after I did such a bad thing? And the guy would change, because he was in a relationship with somebody who was positive and holy, and that transformed him.
And that goes back to what you were sharing before about how you were able to help a friend that so many therapists could not, and you really attribute it to that you really genuinely care. And it's possible that was missing in those other relationships. But it just shows the power in our lives, too, that it's true. When we're carrying, how often you're carrying something heavy and someone offers to share the burden. Even two people carrying that same heavy bag, all of a sudden the weight it's not as heavy anymore. And there is something to that also. When we're in relationships with people who care, then I think it also helps us relieve that burden that we're sometimes choosing just to carry on our own. Now, it also goes back to, we were saying earlier that when you're in a relationship with someone who's showing empathy and care, there's also almost like a reflection back, and we're receiving that. It brings that out of ourselves to maybe even care more and have a better sense of self-worth within ourselves if I'm with someone who's showing that to me. And so that comes back to then, I think, the third step, which is how do I drop it? And we were saying, you said it earlier in the show that sometimes we have to change the narrative. As you were sharing about with your mother, you think of a situation one way, and then all of a sudden something opens up your eyes to realize, there's another way to see this situation. Sometimes that can be another positive person that all of a sudden, again, we've been thinking about our lives, our stories, the way our lives have played out in one direction. Sometimes someone who has a more positive effect on us can give us a new way of thinking of the same situation.
Right. And I would add to that, though, that when we talk about carrying baggage, it's generally connected to being still very connected to your past. And I think we need to practice more being present in where we are now and realizing that. And so I really encourage a lot of people that I work with to get to some real regular exercise routine. I think they might find that strange that a rabbi is saying that, but I see this, that when people exercise daily, then something really happens whereby they become more present with their bodies. Like, there's something very holy about our bodies, because our bodies have no sense of the past or the future. Our bodies are very present. And Judaism is definitely not against our bodies. It's about a balance, but our body can anchor us now. When I taste something, that's why I think that people go through what's called emotional eating, is because I think that they're desperately looking to get into the now, and the food and the taste of the food is bringing them into the now. Now, this is not the most healthy, this is not a healthy way to do it. But what they're trying to do is be more present, because they're lost in the past, or they are freaking out over anticipation of the future, and they're not present. And, in the name of God, which is the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, the Hey, correlates to God being now, then, and later, all at the same time. In other words, according to Kabbalah, God's mindset is eternally now. The past, the present, and the future for God are all now. And if I want to tune into God, then I also have to be on the frequency of being more present with what I'm doing, with who I am, and therefore relieve myself of thinking about the past all the time.
No, it is so true, because I think when we think of emotional baggage, so much of what weighs us down is worrying about the future and all the negativity that we're bringing with us from the past. It's like we're carrying it with us, so why can't we just put it down and leave it there? And I think between worrying about the future and carrying whatever negativity we might have had in our past, we're actually not able to recognize that we may have some beautiful moments in the present that we're just missing because we're carrying so much from the past and always so worried about looking back, or we're thinking about, all the fears of moving forward. And the idea that you're sharing here of really trying to be in the present moment, which I think so much has to do with, when we have to focus on gratitude. Right now, what do I have to be grateful for? It doesn't take away what happened in the past. It doesn't take away that we don't know what the future is. But the more I can practice focusing on at this moment, right now, stop yourself. What are you grateful for? What are you grateful for? What are you grateful for? It really trains our mind to not get so swept up in the future and the past, but to be able to also say, right, that all exists, but I can also appreciate what is now, and there is something good right now.
Well, because really life is only happening now. The past is a memory and the future is a speculation. The only time we're actually alive is now. And yet, how now are we? And I think that would help us drop a lot of this baggage, because the baggage is a thought. As you mentioned, either it's I'm thinking about the past and I'm angry or resentful, or I'm thinking about the future and I'm worried and stressed. But so the answer would be, so then be now, because when I'm immersed in what I'm doing, that's when I'm happy.
And there's also there's more of an ability to choose what's going to be now. Meaning, I don't necessarily feel like I have control over the future. None of us do, right? What happened in the past happened. One choice is how I can think about it. That definitely is a choice. But definitely, I think the biggest choice, which gives us the best sense of freedom to have some control in our lives, is whatever is going on now, what am I going to choose? What am I going to choose to focus on? And there's always that ability, specifically now, of choosing to focus on something positive, something good, something that makes me feel better, instead of something that just pulls me down.
Yes. And so so much of the baggage is made of thought. In fact, it's all made of thought. and if we can identify, the baggage is made of thought. And so why am I not choosing to think something else? Because it just keeps coming back, because I'm not immersed in what I'm doing now. When I'm immersed in what I'm doing now, there's no way I could think about what's happening, what's going to happen, or what happened. And so the more I can be engaged in my life right now, the better.
And this takes practice, because I think we all know that our mind tends to wander. And yet the reality is that, do I want my mind to control me, or do I want to have a sense of where I let my mind think? I think no matter what a person's gone through in life, we all have the ability for our mind to focus on the negatives, the problems, the challenges, the negative thoughts that keep accruing. Or we can say, wait a minute, is this who I want living in my brain? I think so often when we get sensitive or offended by other people, we're not as kind to ourselves as even others are. Sometimes we're much harsher with ourselves with the kinds of thoughts we allow to live in our head that have an even stronger effect than what anyone outside of ourselves can say to us.
Yes. Yep, absolutely.
And especially since we can't control what other people choose to say, where we do have control, I think, again, sometimes we make the mistake of not putting the energy. We're so focused on thinking about maybe what someone else has said to me or has done to me, instead of saying, okay, but I have control over what I do for myself. Am I kind to myself? Am I taking care of myself? Am I allowing this resentment, whether it's justified or not in my own head, but am I allowing it to stay inside of me and eat me up? Or am I going to say, no, I'm going to be kind to myself, and letting these thoughts stay in my head is not being kind to me. I need to figure out a way to let them go. And going back to exercise, I think that such, finding ways that we can, in constructive ways, let out that angst and energy is so important.
Right. But what I've discovered is you can't stop thinking. You can only start thinking. I have a thought that's annoying me. I shouldn't think that thought. I shouldn't think that thought, which causes me to think about it more. I think a lot of people have too much time on their hands, and they're bored, and their mind just goes back to places it's familiar with. And we there's a certain occupational therapy here is get busy, get productive, and do good now. And I think that would help us let go of the baggage, because I have something more important to do right now than carry some baggage that's made of thought.
And it goes back to, again, the first step, identify. If we can recognize we're carrying this emotional baggage, how it's holding us back, then we'll be able to take the next steps of understanding what it is and how to say goodbye to it. And again, identifying that so much of the baggage are thoughts, then the more we can identify, what are these thoughts that are holding me back? What thoughts can I choose? Do I want to have instead, so I can let go and feel my better self? That's what we can choose. I want to thank you all for joining us. Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.